And we are live with Shennell McCloud from Project Ready. Don't let me butcher your name first thing in the morning.
Okay. First
Shennell,
thing in
thank
the
you for
morning.
coming on. I
Not a
appreciate it.
problem. I am so honored and humbled to be sharing some time with you, Chris. So
Well,
yeah, I can't wait to dig into our conversation. I'm fired up this morning.
well, I'm glad. I'm happy to have you here for one. For my viewers and listeners, Shennell is actually the executive director of Project Ready, a group in Newark, New Jersey, that builds community power by getting more people to be involved with the electoral process, specifically to have a voice around education. I thought it was an important time to have this conversation because Newark is just fresh off of a school board election,
Yes.
and it could serve as a case study, a microcosm of what happens nationally. To set this up, Shennell, I was a school board member before. I have lots of friends that are school board members, and the ones who haven't been school board members, I'm pushing to run for school board. So I feel like everybody should do it once. Like you have to get that education. You should do it once, right? All my qualified people who listen to this or see me, I have very few theories of change. One of them is that educated, dynamic people need to run for school board. And they need to not just run, but they need to win. And in addition to that, running is one thing, but the moment you decide you want to run, you need a team. You need other people. So if you don't want to run for school board, but you can become a campaign manager,
right,
or a campaign supporter, those are desperately in need too, because the moment you decide to run, that's the first thing you need. You need people around you.
Yes. And Chris, I want to add, you mentioned educated, dynamic. I want to add that it's in good practice, and we've seen in Newark, to have parents who are educated, who are dynamic, who are fierce advocates for their children, also running for school board and prioritizing being a leading voice in what policy needs to look like in their community.
I think that's very important. Oftentimes, the people who do run are part of a machine, a political machine. Oftentimes, that in many cities, that machine is not necessarily a grassroots machine.
Yes.
You know, so the candidates aren't necessarily rising organically through the parent ranks,
right,
through the ranks of school volunteers or something like that. Oftentimes, it's part of the political machine. Many times, in many places, a person might run for school board as a stepping stone to want to be city council member or to be some other office, right? To get to some other office. That's a shame, because I always hated that as a school board member, because the lives of children are too important to be messing around with people that just have ambitions to use the office for something else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. Let me just to push on that a little bit. I think absolutely you need to be coming in to thinking about being a school board member or any role with the pure intention to make sure you're making an impact on that community. I will say that what we've seen here in Newark is that there are more parents and more family members that are stepping up to the plate and are claiming their role at the table. They are claiming their leadership. And I'd be very excited to see what a future looks like for them within school board and beyond school board. I think the bottom line is, Chris, we see low turnout across Newark for our residents specifically. And I attribute one of those reasons to the fact that we don't have enough people that we believe in and that we think are actually speaking to who we are and what it is that we need as residents and as parents. So if you're a school board member and you've come in, and I appreciate what you're doing, and you're lining up a great system for my kids, then it's possible that I want to see you doing additional things within our community in order to continue to secure the resources.
Why do you think it is, though, that we don't rise up enough of those people? It feels like there's a disconnect between school board and the community.
Yes.
So the political machine that runs what happens on school boards, and then parents and teachers and educators and friends and family, and you know, they seem to live in two different places politically. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a couple reasons. One, I want to piggyback on what you're saying, in that there are definitely political machines and operatives that are running candidates and that have their own mission in mind. And so I definitely would say that that's one reason. I think another reason is there are some parents and family members that even I've spoken to that were just like, I didn't even know what steps I could take. I didn't even know securing a leadership role like this could be possible. Until I got into this work as a resident of Newark, born and raised here, I didn't even know what the process looked like. All I knew was I was sitting in an audience. I was looking at people up on a stage. They were making these decisions that I didn't necessarily understand. And I thought to myself, wow, how do you even get there? And so I think that education around what steps you can take to even get there is something that we need to be pushing more for our community members, so that we can see a surge in the right, fierce advocates actually advocating for us.
I think the education part of that is so important, because if you want to run for school board, it's possible that you don't even know what a school board member does. It's possible
or what the
that
qualifications are.
The qualifications. You might tell yourself, I'm not qualified, and you really are.
Yes.
To be very honest with you, like you might say, oh my God, I don't have a college degree, or I don't, I've never done any business stuff. You don't need that. That's not what the rules say. The rules say you need to be 18 and a registered voter.
Right.
And we've had some really success stories nationally with young people running for school board and winning.
And I love that.
It's amazing. There was one kid who won it.
We've
you
got
do.
one here.
Oh, wow. Really?
Dorian Murray is, I believe, the first youngest elected Newark school board member that we've seen. And I love her. We have other people that are obsessed with what she's doing. And she's really given a lot of hope to other youth who are thinking about this, but just didn't know, again, that it was possible.
You'll have to connect me with her, because that sounds like an amazing person to talk to.
You will love her.
Here's the thing. National research says, first of all, let me just say there's not much research on school boards and school board elections, but the research that there is says that school board members, elected school board members, tend to be more male, more white, and more wealthy, or more middle and upper middle class than the districts that they serve. They look over. That's national research.
Yeah.
Basically, it's typical to have a school board that does not necessarily reflect the school district that they're in. So that's a normal thing, which is one reason to push more of us to run and to do what you said, more organic people coming from the actual communities. But here's something I want to push on, because you'll know something about this with Newark that I think is, you'll find it in other cities too, which is there's a poll in Newark that just came out that basically said that education is high on the list for parents and voters and community members.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting things in that poll. The things that we think they would care about, like free meals, only 15% say that they've actually picked up the free meals right now. Most of the parents are satisfied with remote learning, and the ones who are the most satisfied are moms, not dads. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
African Americans are more likely to be dissatisfied on the other end of the spectrum of what's going on, and most worried about losing ground during this COVID stuff. So it's all like really good information in this poll that I saw. But the one thing that I found really interesting was all of this says that people care about the process or about education. But when it comes to school board, there's like 3 to 5% turnout.
Yes. So let me dig into that.
Help me with that, because how can two things be true?
Let me take a sip of my
my
protein shake to get ready. So, okay. Project Ready actually commissioned that poll. When we were getting into COVID-19, the pandemic, realizing that remote learning was not just going to be something that was going to be happening over the course of a few weeks, but was going to be happening more long term. As a team, we decided that we wanted to commission a poll that would specifically get at what the community actually needs. I think a lot of organizations and, even media platforms were coming in and assuming what the community needed, but we wanted to make sure that we actually got at what they wanted, what they cared about. And so the poll we commissioned interviewed roughly 457 Norkers, and all of the things you highlighted were highlights that came from the poll. We were intrigued and also, should I say, excited about the fact that education rose to the top just as much as unemployment concerns, just as much as financial concerns, food concerns. And I think you're right, Chris. We realized from this poll that the community at large is showing that they do care about education. They want to make sure that their children and other children, quite frankly, across the city, are absolutely getting what it is that they need from all facets of the program that are coming out. And so we were excited to commission that poll, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to commission more polls that could bring this information. So that's the first part. Now on to school board, which has been, it feels like my life's work in getting people activated. We have not had, prior to the pandemic, enough people even know that the school board election exists in April. I'm still shocked when I come across someone that's like, I didn't even know it existed. And, this may be a little provocative to say, but I've been in rooms, Chris, where I've listened to people actually say it's for the best that more people don't know about this election.
Wow.
Or we can, yes, I have.
Yeah.
I bet you want to know what I did in those rooms.
Yeah, I bet I can guess.
I thought about Project Ready and getting out of those rooms so that we could educate the public about this. I've even heard narratives where it's like, okay, we can predict that a certain amount of people will vote, and based on that, we know for sure that we can get our person in. And that's not okay. That's not okay.
No, it's not.
Our school board controls a $1 billion budget. They control outcomes for kids. They control outcomes for my 3-year-old and my 2-year-old to come. And so we've spent a significant amount of 2 years worth of time and counting, really making sure that the public knows about all opportunities to be able to vote. Yesterday was our election, and we were able to see that roughly, and we're still getting the numbers in, 7,300 people have voted in this Newark school board election. And we've also seen an increase of registered voters. And we attribute a lot of that to being able to work with other organizations who are prioritizing making sure that we can see sustainability in our numbers, and then an increase in our numbers.
Yeah, let me push on this a little bit, though.
Okay,
I want to push on this. Yeah, let's get provocative for real.
All right, I'm ready.
Newark is a place where there was a lot of talk about local control. The state had taken over local schools for years, for a long period of time, since the 90s. And if you go back a little bit in time, not that far, you will find lots of claims that the state was usurping the local power for the schools, and that a return to local control and to elected leaders would create a more democratic education system. Right. That same claim is made in many places across the country, that it'll be more democratic. But when I look at something like this in Newark, so I'm in 2017, there were roughly 140,000 registered voters. There were 7,500 ballots cast, right? So now let's get our minds around this for a second. You have the power to vote. You have a local election. You have local control that people like your mayor and others say is so important when the state takes it away from you. Right. They, and I saw this in New Orleans too, all those years after Katrina, that there wasn't a school board. There was a constant narrative about we need democracy back. And now they have an elected school board. And if you look, the numbers are very much like Newark. Yeah. Right. So this isn't an anomaly. No. People say one thing and they do another. I wonder why, if I was one of those politicians who was pushing for local control, telling the state that you need to give us our power back, I wonder why you wouldn't have a large scale democracy building education campaign in your city to ensure better numbers. Yes.
I mean, I don't want to say that we may not see that yet. Local control is something that's very new for us. And I think that there are a lot of things that needed to be adjusted with local control. For example, I mean, our Newark school board members were not able to weigh in the way that they are right now. And I think from the moment we received local control to this moment now, we've been able to see a lot more new initiatives and policies that our Newark school board members have pushed. And so I think they maybe more or less, and I'm speaking for them. I love to get their take on this later, but if I were them and if I were in their seat, I would be wanting to make sure that we get our budget in order. I would want to be making sure that we get policies and initiatives pushed that we couldn't push before because we didn't have the ability to. And then I would want to make sure that we were activating our voters to make sure that we have an equitable process here. I think there are steps, and I'd love for you and I to talk again in maybe a year or so to see if this actually comes about. I think that it will.
Do you think that'll mostly come from nonprofit organizations or from the political leadership itself? Like
I think it will come I don't think it will come from a collective work that we're all doing. I mean, if I can be honest with you, Chris, the experiences that I've had in Newark prior to this leadership role I have now has felt very much like crabs in a barrel. Like we're all trying to like climb to the top, get out of my way. I'm doing this initiative and maybe you're doing the same thing, but I need to do it better. And through this particular vote by mail process, first of its kind, where it's 100% vote by mail, I've partnered with more organizations than ever. I've been able to talk with more leaders than ever before about how we make sure that people get the information that they need and that they actually can vote. And I've also been able to talk with more elected officials than ever before. And so can we attribute it to local control? Possibly. Can we attribute it to quarantine 2020? Maybe. I'm just happy that it's happening.
You know, I'll say this much. What you just mentioned about the move to voting by mail is typically in states that have voting by mail, it increases voter turnout.
Yes.
Or voter participation, I should say.
Yes, that's accurate.
So it might actually work out that way for you all too. Now that you're experimenting with going more that direction, I still can't get my mind around, Shennell, that you have like, what are those numbers again? So you have a population of 280,000 in Newark. That's in, a few years old of the number. Yeah. The population that is 18 and over is 209,000.
Right.
Registered voters, 140K.
Right. We're actually most accurate number from our Essex County clerk, 155,000 registered voters.
So it's even more now.
It's even more.
Than 2017. So you guys have increased since 2017.
Yes.
Now, when the presidential election comes around, ballot things, I know way more people are going to vote.
Yes. So we're hopeful and predicting and pushing that more people vote. But I have to say, Chris, we were probably the lowest city in Essex County that voted in the 2016 presidential here in Newark. And so, yes, there was an increase, but not enough. And that's another reason why we're trying to make sure we leave no stone left unturned and people having the ability to be able to vote either by voting by mail or by going to the polls. We believe that we should have both options.
I see we have a comment from Yahara.
Hi.
Lopez saying, ask about the budget and updated policy changes. And Ms. Lopez, I don't know what that means exactly, but I'm throwing it out there that you have that as a question. Tafshir Kim Cosby Thomas says, more folks need to understand how the school board affects them besides being a voice for the children in education. There are other ways it looks like she's raising up, which are property taxes, rent prices. There are other things that school board members affect. I think that's a great point because it takes away from the idea that this is a low-level, unimportant office. This is
so important.
It's not super important, isn't it? I mean, they make many decisions.
Major decisions every month that people just are unaware of and don't know about. I want to say this, Chris. I mentioned I was born and raised here in Newark. I had two parents that went above and beyond in order to do everything to give me everything I needed. And while they did that, voting was still not at the top of the list of things that they prioritized in order to educate me and my siblings on as we were growing up. Education was certainly a priority, but not what it looks like to be voting on people that are pushing education policy. And so I think we're in communities where a lot is going on in the household. And the charge that I have for institutions, for organizations, for leaders, influencers, is to make sure that they are pushing as much voter education as possible out so that we can supplement what people may not be able to get in the household, not because the parents didn't want to give it to them, but because the parents themselves have a full plate and we need to be able to add to that and support in that way. So to Tafshir's point, I think that that's an excellent point. We need to educate more.
I think it's really important that when you run for school board, you learn lessons because you door knock, you talk to people, you start hearing and learning, and you hear where there's gaps in information. Like, people will complain about something and you will tell them, that's within my office. Like, if you elect me, I can help you with that, right?
Yes.
And I think that's really important. It also burns out candidates, though, I think sometimes when they encounter many people who they assume or believe really just don't care about education. And I'm kind of on the fence. I know if you and I talk about this honestly, we're both going to land on, no, people care a lot. But in my experience in talking to people about public schools, sometimes it's like pulling teeth.
Yeah, no, actually, I think that I agree with you that I've seen over my time span here, people that don't care at all. They care about the fame, the leadership role, what comes with it, and what they can do with it. And may not even understand policy at all, may not even know the community. That's another reason why it's on the community at large to hold the people accountable when they get in the seat. Voting is not enough. Just being educated about the initial process, going to the poll or voting by mail is not enough. Going to the school board meetings, which, by the way, Chris, more times than less, I see anywhere from 5 to 20 people in the audience, when we definitely should be seeing more. Talking with the elected officials, holding their feet to the fire when necessary is the entire process we have to go through as we're thinking about our kids and what our kids deserve. They deserve that. So I think we're on the same page with that.
That's so important. I mean, I think you just put it in a nutshell. Electing people's one thing, that's a start. That's a good start.
Yeah.
But once they're elected, like showing up and making sure they do what you want them to do, holding their feet to the fire is the bigger process. That is like that's where the magic really happens.
Yes. Chris, can I dig into what David McGuire, I think, wrote here in a comment? He said, I've always wondered, and this gets me excited, David. I've always wondered as a school leader how we can get involved with ensuring the school board truly represents the school community. Great question. I can't count how many conversations I've been in with teachers and administrators that think that their role begins and ends with being in the classroom, in their school, educating their kids, and that's it. When you opt into being a teacher, and I can say this because I've recruited hundreds of teachers in my past life when I was a teacher recruiter. When you enter into this space, you are entering into the community at large. What you do goes beyond those four walls. The city itself is your four walls. And I think when you see it that way, you can then begin to partner with other organizations and people that have a plethora of information on what the school board is, who the candidates are, what they represent, and make sure that you run a C3, because we don't want to get into who's who, but a C3 initiative within your school that informs people about the time to vote, informs people about what the school board does, and how it impacts directly what is happening within your school. All of these things have to be done. Teachers are representatives of the community. They are not just representatives of their classroom.
Do you think that that is true when teachers identify more with their union than they do with their community?
Oh, oh, Chris.
I mean, I'm just asking it. Like, you have
I
some
mean,
cities and some places. I would challenge anybody watching this or listening to this, do a Freedom of Information Act on the zip codes, the home zip codes of your teachers. And I am going to bet you that you're going to find that many of your teachers drive in from suburbs to your district who have no local kind of connection to the local community. And I challenge anybody to look for that information locally and tell me what you find. But I know, for instance, in the Twin Cities, it's the majority of teachers drive in every day.
And I think it's a good push. I can't speak to it either way because the people I'm actually talking about were not people who were part of a union. They were teachers who came in, most of them young and fresh out of college, that were given a narrative. And the narrative, in my opinion, was not enough because it did not encompass the teacher knowing when they walk into the community, they are servants, not just to the students, but the community that the students represent. And whether they're identifying mostly with the union or with suburbs or what have you, I think the narrative when you walk into teaching, whomever you're practicing with and learning about how to become a teacher, that narrative has to be framed in that way. You are a servant to the community, not just to the student.
A wildly off, the path example that I'll just throw at you.
Okay.
In Mexico, the native Indians of northern Mexico, I think it is, Zapatistas, actually overthrew their school system in the Mexican government just in their villages and in their areas. And they took over the schools and they elected their own teachers. And they elected them so like not just hired, but we elect you to be a teacher in our schools. And they went back to a grassroots native version of the education system built by them from the ground up, right?
I love it.
I can't think of an analog to that in America, except for in the past. The schools that Booker T. Washington built, over many years, the teachers were hired by the community, by the Black community. They came out of the community. But we are so far from that right now.
Yes.
We are just so far from that. I mean, the teachers, I think we think romantically about our teachers oftentimes, but they're definite, like the school board members, they're not exactly demographically representative of the parents, the students, and the local communities that they're in.
Yes. And I think that there may be an initial solution to that. I think from the recruitment process, because a lot of institutions have a recruitment process where they're interviewing teachers, they're screening teachers and trying to figure out who's best. I think that incorporating parents, even incorporating students into this process could be the beginning of making sure that we're getting the right people in our schools that actually represent us. I don't know if you know this, but I was a part of the first graduating class of North Star Academy. And I actually got into recruitment as a professional because as a student, they allowed me to come in and interview the teachers. And I'd be like, Miss Jackson, I don't like that one. And I don't think our students are going to like that one either. And, over time, I've been able to articulate more professionally why someone may or may not be a good fit, but they had me involved and we need to be seeing more of that.
I think it's so interesting about that example. I have a friend who was a school leader, charter school leader. He once gave testimony that he interviewed 800 teachers. And one of the questions in the interview was, do you think that all kids can achieve at high levels? And that cut the number of teachers down from 800 to 100, right?
Oh, not even in half.
No, cut it down to 100. And of those 100, if you asked any deeper probing questions about kids of color, that cut it down to 10, right? So he ended out of 800 teachers, he ended up with 10 that he hired out of that entire pool. The funny thing, or not the funny thing, the interesting thing to say about that is that he had the power to hire that 10 as he wanted to. The principal at the school nearby him did not have that power, could not do that, right? You had to, in some cases, just take what we give you. Who we give you.
And I just want to name it. I think that process is unacceptable. You should be able to pick your people. And I think it's your ability to be able to pick your people that also lends to what the development of your people looks like to accommodate for the full team that's going to then educate our kids. And that's absolutely my professional and personal opinion on that.
And the thing that I think for us to say about that is, again, it relates back to the school board. Any of these things that we can complain about, the cultural competency of teachers, the extent to which teachers represent the community and the demographics of the community, the way that you hire, fire, what goes into the teacher's contract, all of that's at the school board.
Right.
All that's on the school board. So if you're not playing at the school board level and you're not turning, here's the thing, because I like what you said about the showing up part.
Right.
But we sometimes have to tell people when and where to show up, because you don't have to show up to every school board meeting. Sometimes there are particular decisions you need to show up. One of the things that I think people need to show up for is you need to be going, and don't let them kick you out of teacher contract negotiations. If community members were going and hearing what I have heard in teacher negotiations, in the teacher contract negotiations, we'd change the game. Yes. Overnight, we would change the game.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that that's a really good point. Though I will push a little bit that I've seen some meetings here in Newark where it's that one meeting and they're about to make that one decision and the room is packed. It's like maybe 100 people in the room. I'm seeing signs. I'm seeing people outside. I'm seeing people yelling at reporters because they got to get their point across. And you think to yourself, as someone who is, maybe you're freshly becoming civically engaged, oh, wow, if this is what it looks like, I need to continue to be active. I need to continue to show up. But then you go to the next meeting and none of that exists. The room is empty. There's no reporters. There's no one advocating at the reporters. Why is that? We need to prioritize, Chris. I'm going to push being at almost every single meeting that we can be at. So that way we know about all of the things that they're making decisions on that affect our children. We owe it to our children to do that.
You know, how would you like to be a mom who takes 2 buses to get to anywhere after 5 o'clock? How'd you like to go to a 6 o'clock school board meeting with no food and take 2 buses to get there and then 2 buses to get home at 10 o'clock at night after everybody has had their chance to pontificate?
Yes.
And you were able to speak for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You know,
Chris, this is a good push. And I think that my counter to that, and I want to be public with this, is that it's on the onus of nonprofits and institutions to make sure that they can have resources flow in so that parents and families can easily access these meetings and have the resources and tools they need to be able to be actively civically engaged. It takes a village, Chris. It takes a village. And by the way, I want to go on record saying I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to do that here in Newark for any mother, any father, any grandmother, what have you, guardian that needs to be able to get to those meetings, but doesn't have a way.
I think this is a really good point for activism, to push for transparency in school board meetings, to make them accessible. It's 2020. We have all kinds of technology we're not using. Some school districts
we're learning that right now, right, Chris?
We're totally learning it. Like
a ton of technology.
Like anybody watching or listening to this right now, please get back to me and let me know whether or not your school board meetings are live streamed, so that people who are shut in can watch them. Please get back to me and let me know whether or not your school board's meetings travel the city from school to school and are not just held in some central location that not everybody can get to, for instance.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I remember my colleagues, we were like, we have to go into the community. We have to have these meetings in the community. Right. Yeah. And we own these things called schools, which parents come to all the time, which oftentimes are closer to them. Why don't we just travel different parts of the cities? Let's cut it into 4 and hit each quadrant with our. Do you know how much staff pushback there was on that? Because they didn't want to set up. They didn't want to like move stuff. They didn't want to like have to get buildings ready and all this stuff. And I was just like, we talk a good game about wanting, we talk a good game about involvement. We want people involved. We don't make it easy.
Right. Right.
And that's what we need for advocacy is you better make it easier for people to participate in this process rather than just complaining that they don't show up.
Yes, absolutely. And, Chris, I just want to go back to a previous point you made about the school leader that was bringing teachers in, and then it got cut from 800 down to 10 like that because they couldn't answer one question. The question that I've seen in my time in recruitment that has cut the numbers maybe even more than in half is, why are you interested in teaching in Newark, New Jersey? And they don't know. They don't have a clue. And I'm like, and it's the first question I ask before I even ask, why are you interested in joining said institution, is why are you interested in joining this city, this community? And I think when we're thinking about bringing in resources, like you just mentioned, making it easier for people, as we're bringing more people into our community that are ultimately going to be in front of our children, leading our children in any way, we have to ask the question, why this city? Why are you prioritizing here? And make sure that they have a good answer.
For you and your state, actually, it's hitting me now. This is what I remember about New Jersey. Chris Christie, your old governor, he's not your governor anymore, but Chris Christie tried to pass something at one point that said, if you want to teach in New Jersey, this is so funny to me. This is going to be so crazy. That. As it's coming out my mouth, I'm like thinking how stupid this actually is.
I remember that.
He tried to pass a law or a policy that said, if you want to teach in New Jersey public schools, you have to live in New Jersey. And the teachers unions fought him on a rule that said you have to live in the state if you want to teach in the state's public schools. And I'm cracking up about this because I don't know your guys' geography well enough to know why this would ever be a problem, but apparently people were driving into New Jersey from other states.
From New York.
From New York. Got it.
That's how it hit home for me. They were coming in from New York in order to teach here in the city of Newark. And I remember people being very scared when Chris was attempting to push this and trying to figure out if they needed to now move to New Jersey in order to educate the kids at the school. So yes, I remember that.
My organization, Brightbeam, we put out a report in January called The Shame of Progressive Cities. That report came out of all the traveling that I've done, and I go to urban centers that are often very progressive, lots of college-educated people, lots of money, places like Seattle and the Twin Cities and San Francisco and Austin and others. And for some reason, places like San Francisco, the Black students in San Francisco are doing worse. Even though it's the wealthiest county in the state, the Black students are doing worse than most of the state. Right. Wow. I couldn't put two and two together. People hated us when we put this report. Oh my God. How would you shame us like this? Like we're so progressive.
Right. But kudos to you for doing it.
Well, and this is why I think it wraps into this discussion. Like someone here basically said San Francisco has started live streaming their school board meetings during COVID, which I think is really important because one of the things I did in the process was I was watching school board meetings for the ones that streamed them from some of these cities.
Right.
And when
Newark streams also, Chris, by the way.
What's that? Newark streams. Yeah, I see somebody says that here.
They do.
Being able to like just watch it from home and see what people are actually talking about. Over time, when I watch Seattle school board meetings, for instance, I just came to the idea that they do not love Black children in Seattle. It is every time the issue comes up and the topic comes up, they whitewash it with multicultural themes. And we can't just talk about the Black kids. We can't just really talk about them because that's not fair. Well, it's not equitable. We have to talk about multicultural and everything else. And you know what? In all those progressive cities, that was an issue. They didn't want to talk specifically about Black students or Black boys or Black girls as unique cases that they might need to address. They wanted to whitewash it with this progressive multicultural thing. And once you watched the school board, you knew what the problem was. Once you said, okay, I'm going to watch 10 meetings of San Francisco or Seattle or any of these other cities, at the end of that, you would go, okay, now I know what the problem is.
Yeah. And, that's one of the reasons why when we commissioned the poll that we did, we were able to break it down so that we could actually identify what African-American families were prioritizing. How were they thinking about education? How were they thinking about remote learning? We have to be able to get at those essential conversations. And yes, I absolutely think that your school board is representative of what some of these conversations could look like. Totally agree.
I love organizations like yours
Thank
that
you.
take on the work. I really do. I think it's such a great idea, to take on the work of democracy building. Like this is, something, number one, we don't usually fund that.
Mm-hmm. But it needs funding, by the way.
Needs lots of funding. In New Orleans, when we were doing all this, like look at New Orleans post-Katrina, I made lots of visits down there. I spent a whole summer. I was writing about it, researching, talking to family members. And one of the things I said was, you guys had like $42 billion come through New Orleans to rebuild it. And you rebuilt everything except for democracy. You rebuilt schools. Now they have air conditioning. When I was a kid, we didn't have air conditioning in New Orleans public schools. I just told somebody this yesterday. I can't remember who, but can you imagine, being in a classroom with no air conditioning in New Orleans?
What did you learn those days?
I learned how to fight to get a seat closest to the window. Actually, this came up in our team meeting yesterday, and that's what I learned. I learned how to fight to get that seat closest to the window, as if even being close to the window was going to be
going to help.
That was going to help anything,
It's hot down here.
But now they have all these beautiful buildings, and they have air conditioning, and they look like little, many junior colleges and everything. They didn't rebuild the democracy, the process of civic participation.
And what's so interesting about that, Chris? What launched me into advocacy in general is because when I was in college, I drove down with New Jersey PIRG to help with the relief 3 years after Hurricane Katrina came in. And we were in the 9th Ward. We were trying to help to rebuild. I was down there for 2 weeks. And one of the things we participated in was a rally outside of one of the school buildings because the community was livid that they were shutting the school down. And I had no idea what I was into. I just knew I was at a rally. I was down in New Orleans. People were very upset, and they didn't want that school building to close. And so New Orleans actually was the beginning of my understanding of what advocacy really needs to look like. You mentioned that they didn't take a moment to rebuild the democracy. I can't speak yay or nay to that because I haven't been in New Orleans to speak to that, but I will say that the moment that I had in New Orleans, seeing the advocacy and where education has come in New Orleans since that time, to me does contribute to the beginning of rebuilding democracy. I'm not going to say that it's not a direct contribution to democracy because education is freedom, and that leads to our ability to be able to understand what a fair democratic process needs to look like for us. So I just want to name that. New Orleans set me up for some success. They did.
It's a great point. And in saying that, I should be honest and say that democracy wasn't beautiful before Katrina. And the reason that it's not to beat up on New Orleans or beat up on our political class, but the reason that's important for this conversation is if you do not have good leadership and elected leadership and school boards, that is what predates the state taking things away from you. So we're not very honest as communities when we have corrupt school boards, double dealing contracts, people getting arrested, like our school board members were in New Orleans prior to Katrina. That actually sets up the stage for you being taken over. Right.
Understood.
So we can't show up at the, there's no wrong time to show up, but we can't just show up when there's something like that going on. You mentioned school closing. The one way I knew that we would always get good turnout is if we tried to close a school.
Right. And that's so bad, right?
Yep. We try, and I mean, close a bad school. We would be like, we want you to come to this envisioning process to turn the school around. And we would host multiple nights and have tamales and chicken and all kinds of stuff going on, and caterers, and 4 people would show up. They would eat the food and leave and blah, blah. Then we would go back and try and close that school. And everybody would show up saying, oh my God, how could you dare close this? It's the pillar of the community. It's central to everything we care about. Lord had mercy. I went to this school. Now, I don't put my kids in this school, but I went to this school,
I went to the school back in the 40s.
It was always a long time ago. That's right. That's true. And as a school board member, you wanted to say sometimes, now some things have changed since then, right?
Just a little bit.
Right.
Just a little bit, yes.
I think someone in our feed here had actually said in an earlier comment that people really do show up when it's time to hire or fire the superintendent too.
Yes, that's
so it's
true.
not like we can't show up.
Right.
It's not like we can't.
It's
I
that
just
we
think,
choose when to. We choose when to.
we choose when to. And I don't think you do need help knowing when it's really important for building power, when to show up, because you can't come every time.
Right.
You really just can't come every time.
Right. Though I think the push you made, and it escaped me, but when you made it, I remember live streaming, and given especially where we are as a country, is a very easy way for us to still be in tune. And that is something that Newark does prioritize. And so if you can't make the meeting directly, and we don't even know what the future holds in the midst of the pandemic, live streaming and being actively involved in that live stream, I think is another good way to be able to be involved.
So I think that when we find points like that, we should put a stake in them and say, this is an agenda item for everybody locally. Make sure that your school board live streams. I'll go a little bit further, and I made this point earlier, but I'm going to come back to it because I think it's provocative but important.
Okay.
You should also make sure that those teacher contract negotiations are live streamed too. Those should be public, open meetings, first of all, and in most cases they're not. They actually host them in places so they know you won't be able to come on purpose. Many of them have never seen a community member in tens of years, in decades, right? Have never ever seen a community member in them because people assume they're supposed to be private. What I want to say to you is a teachers union is a private organization that is not a public organization who is negotiating the most major public investment in a school district that they ever make. And oftentimes they are negotiating it with political people. And I don't care where you land on the political spectrum, as a taxpayer, as a parent, as a stakeholder, you should know what is said in that room. You should know what goes into that contract.
I totally agree. And I see Maritza has been on, Siobhan, Tavshir, a few other people. I think the call to action, especially when we're at a critical moment in our country where we are redefining what engagement looks like in the midst of the pandemic, I think that there should be a proposal that is made for what we as citizens expect to see from our school board members.
Ooh, I love it.
This is not the time to go private. This is the time to go public. This is not the time to shy away from what we need to know. This is the time for us to know. This is not the time for you not to run community meetings so that community members can weigh in. In fact, we need it now more than ever. And I think if we can put together that proposal and propose it to school districts across the country, propose it to school board members across the country, then we'll be able to see what it is that we need, especially as we're redefining what engagement looks like in the future.
Do you worry that this could be a time where school districts could on purpose practice less transparency?
Absolutely.
Take advantage of the pandemic to not be as transparent?
Yep. And by the way, I'm not speaking on Newark specifically because I think Newark has been doing a good job of being transparent and being upfront. But why not? If people are not looking up and people are not being vocal about what it is that they want, then why not use this as an opportunity to take advantage? And that's another reason why, again, we have to continue to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire. And we have to be clear and articulate about what it is that we need to see from them.
What do you think who do you think is the best person to push that agenda of transparency? Who in a community is best suited to push that?
Parents and families, guardians. And I name them first because that's the first voice. And then from there, community stakeholders, organizations, similar to my own, in that order, need to be responsible for putting forth this call to action.
I noticed that
and students too. I want to name that too, because we just named that there are youth who are becoming actively involved in the process and want to be. And so their voice has to be at the table too.
I think it's amazing that schools don't teach students how to participate in democracy to the extent that they should. I know a few charter schools.
Especially school board. Why not?
I mean, listen, students used to bring me, when I was on the school board, students used to bring me some of the best resolutions to pass.
Yes.
They would bring me like
Yes.
real issues, and I'd be like, oh, that's an easy one to do. We'll go ahead and make that happen.
Right.
Really good, policy solutions that just needed some refining and some partnership
Right.
with them.
Right. And they've got quick ways to be able to think it through. And I mean, Chris, especially in this digital age that we are in, where it's only going to increase, and we're looking to address tons of issues, including the digital divide, who better to have at the table than our youth to be able to help us navigate?
I wonder if I'm listening to this and I'm very cynical about community participation.
Okay.
If we in this discussion have overcome the cynicism about the degree to which people actually really do care about the public schools. And in one ways, I'm thinking about different people. If you are already satisfied with what you have, for instance, why do you need to get more involved? Right.
Right.
If you really appreciate, like if you've moved to that part of the city or that part of the town, you've paid your little extra money for your mortgage. The time for you to show up is when school districts try and redraw boundaries and let some of those people into your schools, right? And that's what I noticed as a school board member is those folks would get activated and organized quickly to stop us from doing things that they'd stop us from doing equity things. Let's just put it that way.
Right. And I think we're at an interesting moment, and call me optimistic because, by the way, I'm a huge optimist. If you haven't gotten that,
sounds like it. Yes, I get that from you.
I'm like, we can do it. But I think we may be at a moment where we can see more people coming together, specifically surrounding equity at a time where everyone is remote learning. Everyone. And everyone is thinking about whether or not their kid is getting exactly what it is that they need so that they can ultimately be successful. No one's really thinking about a facility. No one's really thinking about the area because everybody is homeschooling in their home, or at least they're trying to. I know I'm trying to. And so I wonder if this is the unique moment where all those parties that thought that they were maybe exempt come together and start to really challenge the educational institutions that need challenging so that we can get what it is that our kids need together. Is that too optimistic?
No, it sounds, I would build on it. I would just ask, so you think that people having their kids at home right now, seeing them, where they're shining and where they're not.
Yeah.
Maybe in some cases they've figured out some deficits that they didn't know about, like some stuff they weren't being taught. You think that might be a good jumping off point for a new commitment to being involved?
I absolutely do. And also a reshaping of the narrative where we're not so focused on what kind of institution is educating our kids, but what education actually flows from those institutions that is able to give our kids what they need right now. Right now in this pandemic, where we don't know when we're going back to school. We don't know when we're going to be back in that facility. We just know we're doing it remotely.
I like this point. No matter how we look at it, there's not going to be any scenario in the future where parents aren't going to be key to the restart of schools. You can't catch up millions of kids without some different type of relationship with home now.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And let me push a different relationship with yourself.
That's true. Are you going to do that man in the mirror thing, that Michael Jackson man in the mirror thing, huh?
I've been looking in the mirror lately, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the whole idea, I think, for a long time was to parent-proof education, with the belief that we were going to educate kids in spite of parents. With the pandemic, that is out of the window because even if schools open in the fall, they're not going to open to full capacity. And when it comes to catching kids up, now you're going to need parents as a partner in a way you've never needed them before, right?
Yeah. It's so funny. I at this point, I would say, I would flip it. Parents are going to need teachers in a way that we didn't predict, because even as a parent myself, I'm like, look, that teacher has this responsibility for my kid. They need to get it done. And it's like, no, actually, I'm the leading voice and the leading educator for my kids. And what you were doing as a teacher and what the system is doing as a system is in partnership with me to make sure that my kid gets whatever it is that they need. And so I think we have to walk into the redefinition of education exactly in that way.
I'm not hopeful that school districts are getting that message right now just because of my own anecdotal local experience. My school district did a very good job of switching to remote learning. It took them about 2 weeks of planning and they were up and running. And I was happy with it the first couple of days. But what I've discovered since is, number one, they didn't ask us anything. They still don't ask us anything. And now we are having an experience because we have multiple kids. We get to see different teachers.
Right.
And if you were a bad teacher before or a worksheet type teacher before who didn't teach a lot, distance learning is not your place. It's not working out for us. If you were a great teacher before, you are doing videos right now and having office hours and all kinds of times for lost parents to be able to come in and say, I don't understand this or whatnot. So we're having a mixed experience, but the district isn't asking us anything about it. Like, hey, is this working out for you? How could we improve? How could we do better? The assumption is just kind of take what you get.
Yeah, and I think if the school board members, just to bring it full circle, if the school board members in communities are laying low and not pushing on the superintendent, whom they oversee, in order to make sure that there are more virtual community meetings that are happening to garner what the parents want, then I'd push that they're not doing their job. And thus, like, the superintendent's not doing their job, and then everyone else that flows from that. School board members have to absolutely make sure that they're prioritizing being completely in touch with the community now more than ever.
And what if they're not?
Well, then we all fell. Don't take me there.
I mean,
we all fell.
Yeah, it's and in this whole time we haven't mentioned superintendents either.
Right. Well, it came up a little bit. It came up a little bit.
Just a little bit. And one of the most important things that a school board does is hire the executive that's going to run everything.
Right.
And keep that person accountable to you as a community and community members. I only bring that up right now because if you're listening to this and you care about school board, you need to know that school boards don't do everything in the world. They do a couple of things really well. They have one employee, which is the superintendent, and they hold that employee accountable to goals and a vision that they set as a board.
Yep.
So that's your power situation. If we are looking to locate the power button in education, it really isn't in many of these things that we talk about in reform. I could probably let a lot of them evaporate if I could just get people to concentrate on where the power actually is.
Right. Absolutely.
And we don't, we're kind of all over the map about that. As we wrap, what would you say to the people watching and listening is not maybe one or more of the most important lessons that you just learned out of this election that you just had, the school board election that Newark just had?
Yeah. First, let me go to the most important lesson I think I learned just now with us talking. And that is, I want to push again on parents, family members, guardians to take a moment to get together and outline exactly what it is that you want to see from your school board members who, as Chris mentioned, are holding your superintendent accountable. And take a moment to have a meeting with them virtually, safely, in order to issue what it is that you want to see from them in the midst of all of this. And I think that that's definitely like a first important step. If we take away nothing else, I want us to take away that. And then I think the second thing before I get to what I learned from the school board meeting is we mentioned that there are people who are bringing in leadership to the community, and some of the leadership are not even clear about why they're in the community to begin with. And so I think we need to make sure that we're pushing and asking the critical question, why are you interested in being in this town, representing this community, and what will your engagement look like with the community moving forward? So those two top takeaways. What I've learned from the election we just left yesterday is that people will vote by mail. We've learned nothing else. People will do it. We've had tons of people come to our Facebook page, Project Ready, and call the question, will people actually vote by mail? Will they take it seriously? Do they believe in it? And I think if we've seen nothing else, just based on the numbers alone, that people will vote by mail and people will use it as an opportunity to exercise their vote. And so what I'm hopeful for as we get closer to the primaries and the presidential is that other communities across the state, across the nation are able to see what's happening here in New Jersey. And they're able to say, okay, we're going to make sure that polls are open in an equitable way. We're also going to make sure that vote by mail is available to all.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to pay a dime for it. You don't have to pay for the ballot to return the ballot.
Wow.
And you don't have to pay for an application should you have to fill out a vote by mail application. Postage is paid for.
Wow.
And you're able to exercise your vote free of charge because that's what the general public deserves.
I appreciate this so much.
No problem. I had so much fun.
It's one of my favorite topics to cover. And I think for everybody watching and contributing in the comments, thank you so much, because I think there's so many great points and ideas in our comments that we should all take to heart. I love this idea around this is an opportune time, since we have our kids at home and we're at home now, to build a different type of relationship with the schools and the districts. I love the idea around pushing locally for just common sense, basic, small things like live streamed meetings, live streamed teacher contract negotiations, more transparency, creating easier access to school board meetings, making sure that they happen at times that people can participate, make sure that they're traveling within the community to places that people can get to easier. These are common sense, democratic building or democracy building activities you can push for. I love the idea about power building and getting young people involved, getting students, parents, getting others involved in the process. What I will add to this as an organizing tactic, and you've done a lot of organizing, is you don't have to start with a bunch of people. Actually, get one friend. 2 people can turn into 5 people, and 5 people can turn into 20. So you need one good homie who gets where you coming from. And then you need to master the art of the living room meeting. Right?
Yes. Or should we say the virtual living room meeting?
The social distance Zoom meeting. My colleague Dr. Charles Cole has virtual happy hours every day, right?
Yes.
Those are things that you can do, and you don't need a ton of people. You just need 3 or 4 people to get where you're coming from, and you build power from there. This isn't as daunting as it sounds. I want people who listen to this know you can get in, you can make a difference, and the power really is at your local school board. As we've been talking, Shennell's Twitter handle has been going across the bottom if you want to get in touch with her. Just to add, please, feel free to follow me on Facebook. I'm very active there, and follow at Project Ready on Facebook or www.projectreadynj.org. I'd encourage people, number one, to be in touch, to find out what the lessons that can be learned from Project Ready that can apply to other places. I think Shennell, like most good organizers and good people running good organizations, is willing to share information with others of how they can build power. So please be in contact with that. Also, look at the poll that they did, because I think we need a poll like that in more cities. More places.
I would love that.
Yeah. Please come back. I'd love to come back. And you said a year, but I think we should get back together again before a year.
Okay.
And have some other conversations. This has been another episode, another great conversation from Citizen Ed. This has been Shennell McCloud telling her story about building power. And please be in touch with her or me if you want more information. Thank you, as always, for listening and for watching.
Thank you.